Help me! Please, don't let him take my mom! The scream shattered the quiet street like broken glass. Derrick Cole froze, one hand still gripping the handle of a heavy trash bin. From behind a row of luxury cars, a little girl darted out, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with terror. She clung to his leg as if her life depended on it. Derrick dropped the bin instantly, kneeling down. "Grace, what happened? Where's your mom?" Before the trembling child could answer, the front door of the nearby house slammed open. A tall man in a tailored gray suit stormed out, his voice sharp and filled with contempt. "Get your filthy hands off my daughter!" It was Judge Richard Hayes, one of the most feared and respected men in the county court. Everyone knew his name. Everyone whispered about his power. And now he was glaring at Derrick as if he were less than human. Grace buried her face against Derrick's chest, sobbing. "I don't want to go back. I can't. I'd rather die." The words cut Derrick deeper than any blade. He looked from the terrified child to the judge's furious face. The contradiction was brutal. The polished man of the law versus the broken little girl begging for protection. Richard's eyes narrowed. "You think you're some kind of hero, garbage man? You're nothing but a black worker picking up society's trash. Stay in your lane, or I'll make one phone call and you'll lose that pathetic job before sundown." Every word dripped with racism and venom. Derrick's chest tightened, rage boiling inside. He had endured racist insults before, but never with a child clutching him, never with a mother screaming faintly from inside the house. The sound came again, glass shattering, a woman's voice strangled in pain. "Derrick, please, don't let him—" The cry was cut off. Richard spun around and dragged someone into view. It was Martha, Grace's mother. Her face was bruised, her lip split, and her wrists bent awkwardly as he forced her forward. Derrick stepped forward instinctively, but Richard shoved her hard toward the car in the driveway. "Stay out of this!" Richard barked. "This is my family, and you're nothing, just black trash who doesn't know his place." Time seemed to stop. Derrick felt Grace trembling, heard Martha's cries, and tasted the bile in his throat as Richard's words echoed. The choice tore at him. Walk away and keep his job, or stand against a racist judge with money, power, and the system behind him. His hands shook, but his voice came out steady. "Grace came to me for help. I won't ignore that. Not today." Richard sneered, stepping closer. "Then you're signing your own death warrant." The tension was suffocating. The child's sobs, the judge's fury, the mother's desperate cries all collided in the same moment. And right there, Derrick knew. This wasn't just about a garbage man on his route. This was about a black man daring to protect a little girl from a racist system that had already destroyed her mother's life. He looked down at Grace, then back at Richard. "If you were me," Derrick asked, his voice breaking but his eyes burning, "standing here with a child begging to be saved, would you stay silent or would you act?" The question cut through the air like a blade. The line had been drawn. The battle was inevitable. The garbage truck rumbled slowly through Oakwood Heights, its engine humming against the backdrop of carefully trimmed hedges and million-dollar homes. For Derrick Cole, this neighborhood had always been a strange paradox. Clean, quiet, beautiful on the surface, but suffocating with invisible walls of class and race. He had driven this route for 3 years, memorizing every cul-de-sac, every mailbox, every housewife who waved politely without ever remembering his name. But today was different. His shift had started late. His partner called in sick, and for the first time in months, Derrick was running the entire route alone. That delay, 45 minutes, would change everything. As he rolled down the street, his eyes lingered on one particular house, the Grant residence, where Martha lived with her daughter Grace. Derrick had spoken to them countless times in passing. Martha's greetings were always warm but tired, as though she carried a weight she could never set down. Grace, in contrast, would wave excitedly at the truck, her little voice shouting, "Bye, Mr. Cole!" It was those small moments that gave Derrick's job meaning. He wasn't just a garbage man, he was part of the community, even if many pretended not to see him. But this morning, something was off. When Derrick waved, Martha barely glanced up, her eyes darting nervously toward the house. Grace didn't smile. She clutched her backpack tightly, her head lowered, and slipped inside without a word. A knot tightened in Derrick's stomach. Something about their movements, hurried, fearful, didn't match the peaceful facade of Oakwood Heights. And then came the trash. The bin felt heavier than usual. When Derrick hooked it onto the mechanical arm of the truck, a loose bag tore open. Out spilled brand new items, children's uniforms, textbooks wrapped in plastic, toys with price tags still hanging. It was the kind of waste that didn't make sense. Why would anyone throw away things a child clearly needed? He thought of the shelters downtown, filled with kids who would give anything for a clean backpack. He thought of Grace, barely 9 years old, and wondered why her family would discard what looked like a fresh start. Derrick hesitated. Normally he kept his head down, did the job, and moved on. But today, curiosity gnawed at him. He reached into the bag, pulling out a crisp new uniform and a pink binder still smelling of ink. That's when the front door creaked open again. Martha appeared, but she looked different. Disheveled, hair tangled, her blouse wrinkled. She wasn't the composed woman Derrick had seen before. He lifted the bag slightly, raising his voice politely. "Ma'am, excuse me. I noticed these were in your bin. If you don't want them, maybe I could take them to a shelter. Someone could really use these." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Instead of gratitude, her voice snapped like a whip. "Not your business." The harshness stunned Derrick. He tried again, softer. "I didn't mean to intrude, I just thought, if you need them so badly, then take them." Martha's voice cracked, trembling between anger and fear. "But leave us alone." Before Derrick could respond, a crash erupted inside the house. Glass breaking, furniture overturning, the sound of chaos. Martha flinched, her entire body stiffening. In her eyes, Derrick saw something worse than anger. Pure terror. She slammed the door before he could say another word. Derrick stood frozen on the porch, clutching the bag of children's items. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. His training from years ago, the dream of being a cop, the instinct to protect, flared inside him. But he wasn't a cop. He was a garbage man in a neon vest, standing outside the home of a racist judge with more power than he could ever hope to fight. And yet, when Grace stumbled into his arms minutes later, begging him not to let her father take her mother away, Derrick realized this wasn't about power. This was about courage. The battle he thought he'd left behind years ago had just found him again, right here on his morning route. The tension had already been building all morning, but what came next tore away every layer of illusion Oakwood Heights had left. Derrick had barely returned to the truck when he heard hurried footsteps pounding across the pavement. Grace appeared again, but this time she wasn't just crying. She was trembling, gasping for air like she had been running for her life. She threw herself at Derrick, clutching his vest with small hands that shook uncontrollably. "Please, don't let him take her! Don't let him take Mom!" Her words were frantic, splintered by sobs, but the fear in her eyes said more than anything. Derrick's instincts screamed. He crouched down, gripping her shoulders gently. "Grace, what happened? Where's your mom?" Before the girl could answer, The sound of a door slamming behind them snapped Derrick's head up. Richard Hayes emerged, his stride purposeful, his presence heavy with authority and rage. He was no longer the polished judge making speeches in court. Here, on his front lawn, in front of a garbage truck, his mask had slipped. His jaw clenched, his eyes burned, and his words came out like poison. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Grace whimpered, hiding behind Derrick's legs. Derrick straightened, holding his ground. "She came to me. She's terrified. I'm just trying to help." "Help?" Richard spat, stepping closer. "A black garbage man thinks he can help my family?" He barked a bitter laugh. "You're trash, just like the filth you collect. Stay out of this or I swear I'll ruin you." The insult hit like a slap. Derrick's teeth clenched. He had endured racism before, but hearing it hurled so viciously, with Grace trembling at his side, felt like acid eating away at his patience. "Grace doesn't feel safe," Derrick said evenly, trying to keep his voice calm. "Whatever's happening, maybe we should talk." But Richard cut him off, shouting now, "You don't talk to me. You don't talk to my daughter. You don't even look at my house unless you're here to take the trash. That's your place, boy. Remember it." The last word dripped with centuries of venom. "Boy." Derrick's fists curled at his sides. Every muscle in his body begged him to strike back, to defend not just himself, but the child cowering behind him. But training and instinct told him one wrong move would be twisted against him. And then the moment escalated beyond words. Richard stormed back to the door and yanked someone out with brutal force. It was Martha. Her face was battered, one eye nearly swollen shut. Her blouse was torn, her wrists twisted in his grip. She staggered as he dragged her down the steps, her mouth opening in a cry Derrick would never forget. "Derrick, please, help us!" The sound hollowed him out. Derrick's chest tightened until it felt like he couldn't breathe. Grace screamed, clinging to his leg with all her strength. Richard shoved Martha against the car parked in the driveway, his hand gripping her arm like a vice. "This is my family," he growled. "Stay out of it, or I'll make sure you never work in this town again." Derrick took a step forward, torn between fury and fear. He knew the risk. Richard wasn't just any man. He was a judge, a man with friends in high places, a man who believed the law bent to his will. One accusation from him could destroy Derrick's life. But the sight of Grace sobbing, screaming that she'd rather die than go back into that house, it broke through every wall of hesitation. Richard yanked Martha toward the car door. She resisted weakly, but he was stronger. Derrick's heart pounded. His mind raced. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't armed, and he wasn't protected by a badge. All he had was a neon vest, a garbage truck, and a conscience screaming at him not to let this happen. He whispered to himself, "Do something." Grace's cries rose higher, her tiny voice cracking. "Don't let him take her! Please, don't let him take my mom!" It was unbearable. Derrick clenched his fists, lifted his chin, and finally shouted across the driveway. "Enough!" Richard froze, his hand still gripping Martha's arm. He turned slowly, eyes blazing. "You think you can stop me?" Richard sneered. "You're finished, Cole. One call and you're done. You'll lose your job, your freedom. Hell, I'll make sure you rot. Because that's what happens when a black garbage man crosses a judge." The words hung heavy in the air. Derrick's pulse thundered. And then, with every ounce of courage he had left, Derrick stepped forward and answered. "She asked me for help, and I won't turn away." The line was drawn. The first real battle had begun. The driveway was silent after Derrick's defiant words. But the silence wasn't peace. It was suffocating, the kind that presses on your chest and dares you to move. Richard Hayes didn't strike. Not yet. Instead, he tightened his grip on Martha's arm until she winced in pain, then shoved her back toward the car door. Grace sobbed harder, her fists clenching Derrick's vest. For a brief second, Derrick questioned everything. His job, his future, his safety. One move against this man, a judge, and he could lose everything. He could be arrested on the spot, branded a criminal just for standing up. But then he remembered the look in Martha's eyes. The bruises. The terror that clung to Grace's every breath. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. This was a prison hidden in plain sight. Richard sneered, his voice dropping low. "You don't get it, do you? I decide what happens in this town. Not you, not anyone. Me." He jabbed his finger at Derrick's chest. "One report, one call, and you're gone." Derrick swallowed hard. His hands trembled, but not from fear anymore. From rage he could barely contain. Inside his head, a storm brewed. He saw flashes of his own past. The police academy rejection letter. The smirk of the recruiter who had whispered, "We don't need more black boys pretending to be cops." The humiliation. The injustice. The years of swallowing his pride. Now it was happening again. Different man, same venom. Grace's sobs pulled him back to the present. The child's body shook against him, fragile and desperate. Derrick forced himself to kneel down, to meet her eyes. "You're safe with me," he whispered. "I promise." But even as he said it, the sound of shattering glass from inside the house echoed again. Something else had broken. A picture frame. A vase? Or maybe, Derrick thought grimly, another sign of a woman being destroyed piece by piece. He had no authority, no badge, no weapon, just conviction. But conviction was enough to move his hand toward his pocket, pulling out his phone. 901, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was steady, practiced, but Derrick's own voice cracked as he spoke. He described the scene, the bruises, the screaming, the attempted abduction of Martha. He mentioned Richard's name. The pause on the line was telling. The dispatcher knew who Richard Hayes was. Everyone did. Still, she promised units would be dispatched immediately. Richard noticed the phone, and for the first time his expression faltered. Anger gave way to a flicker of fear, quickly masked. He shoved Martha into the car, slamming the door shut. "You think the cops will save you?" he snarled. "They work for me." Derrick held his ground. "Maybe, maybe not. But the call is made. And if they don't come for you, then the whole community will know you were afraid of one garbage man." It was a gamble, words thrown into the fire. But in Grace's tear-filled eyes, he saw a flicker of hope. Moments later, sirens pierced the air. Faint at first, then closer. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance. Grace clutched Derrick tighter, whispering, "They're coming, right? They'll help?" Derrick nodded, though his throat was tight. "Yes, sweetheart, they'll help." But inside he wasn't sure. What he did know, though, was that he could no longer walk away, even if it cost him everything. The wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the perfect white fences of Oakwood Heights. For Grace, it sounded like salvation. For Richard Hayes, it was a threat. For Derrick Cole, it was both. Hope wrapped in uncertainty. As the flashing lights approached, Derrick's mind drifted, unbidden, into the past. He had been 21, standing in a sterile room lined with photographs of smiling cadets. He had trained for months, aced every test, run until his lungs burned. He remembered clutching the acceptance papers like they were his ticket out of invisibility. But then came the meeting. A gray-haired recruiter leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his teeth. "You've got potential, Cole," he said. "But let's be honest. The academy doesn't need another black man from the wrong side of town wearing a badge. It sends the wrong message." Those words had gutted Derrick. He had walked out with the rejection letter, his dream shattered not by merit, but by prejudice. That day, he decided never to rely on institutions again. If justice existed, it wouldn't come from courts or judges. It had to come from ordinary people who refused to stay silent. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came, replaced by the harsh present. Richard was pacing by the car, pulling at his tie, his eyes darting toward the sound of approaching sirens. Martha remained slumped inside, her bruises stark under the porch light. Grace whispered, her voice small but fierce. "He does this all the time. He hurts her. He yells at us. He doesn't want anyone to know." Derrick knelt to meet her gaze. "How long has this been happening?" "Since the divorce," Grace murmured. "He never accepted it. Mom tried to keep him away, but he always comes back." She hesitated, then added, "This morning he found out we hid our passports at Grandma's. He said he was going to take me away, forever." Derrick's stomach dropped. That explained the uniforms, the new books, the toys. He wasn't discarding them. Richard was preparing to relocate Grace, to erase her from her mother's life. Before Derrick could respond, a neighbor appeared at the edge of the lawn, holding up a phone. Another stepped onto their porch, recording. Within moments, half a dozen eyes watched from windows and hedges. Oakwood Heights, once silent, had become a stage. Richard noticed. His fury deepened. "Stop filming!" he roared, hurling a decorative stone towards the gawkers. They ducked, but no one put their phones away. The world was watching now. Grace tugged at Derrick's sleeve. "Do you think they'll believe us? Or him?" Derrick's jaw tightened. "They'll hear your voice, Grace. And I'll make sure they hear mine, too." The squad cars screeched to a halt. Officers spilled out, hands on their holsters, uncertain as they assessed the scene. Richard straightened his tie, forcing confidence back into his stance. "Officers! Thank God you're here!" he boomed. "This man," he jabbed a finger at Derrick, "is harassing my family, threatening us on our own property." Derrick almost laughed at the audacity. Martha stirred weakly inside the car, her swollen face proof of the lie. Grace clung to Derrick tighter, whispering, "Don't let them take me." And Derrick knew the real battle wasn't just with Richard. It was with the system that had failed before. His past, Grace's truth, and the eyes of the community all converged into this single moment. The flashing lights painted the street in red and blue, sirens fading as squad cars braked to a stop. Oakwood Heights had never looked like this before. Neighbors on their lawns, phones raised, whispers buzzing like static. The perfect picture of suburban peace was gone. Derrick Cole stood in the center of it, the weight of Grace clinging to his side, the bruised figure of Martha trapped in Richard's car, and the accusing finger of a racist judge pointed straight at him. For a split second, doubt gnawed at him again. He was just a garbage man. He wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to be the one standing between a judge and his family. But then Grace tugged his sleeve, whispering through tears, "Please don't leave us." And something hardened inside him. He straightened his shoulders, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Richard laughed, ugly and sharp. "You? You're nothing. You think these people will believe a black garbage man over me? A judge?" He spread his arms to the officers. "Arrest him! He's trespassing and harassing my family." The officers hesitated. Their eyes shifted between Richard's polished suit, Martha's swollen face, Grace's terrified expression, and Derrick's steady stance. The silence was unbearable. This was it, Derrick realized. The line. He could either shrink back into the role Richard assigned him, or step into something greater. He took a breath, raising his voice for everyone to hear. Officers, neighbors, the whole street. Grace ran to me for help. I saw Martha bleeding, terrified, begging to get away. And I saw a man in power using his position to hide his violence. That's the truth. and I won't let it be buried." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones zoomed in closer. Richard's face flushed crimson, his mask cracking under the weight of public eyes. "You dare accuse me?" he spat. "I am the law in this town." Derrick stepped forward, standing taller than he ever had. "No, the law is supposed to protect people like Grace, like Martha. And if it won't, then I will." Grace's small hand squeezed his tightly. It was enough to steady him, to remind him this wasn't about his past failures. It was about this moment. One of the officers spoke into his radio, his eyes locked on Martha's injuries. Another gently approached the car, signaling for Richard to step aside. Richard bristled, shouting about rights and lies, but the growing murmur of neighbors and the sight of cameras everywhere made his words sound hollow. Inside Derrick's chest, something shifted. For years, he had carried the weight of rejection, the bitterness of being told he was unfit to serve. Now, in the eyes of a frightened child and a broken mother, he had become what he was denied the chance to be: a protector. Richard tried one last threat. "Cole, you're finished. Even if they believe you now, I'll destroy you later. I'll take your job, your home, everything you've got." Derrick didn't flinch. His reply was steady, unshakable. "You can take everything from me, Richard, but not this moment, not the truth. The world is watching you." It was then Derrick realized he wasn't alone. Grace stood with him. Martha's weak voice, though faint, confirmed his words. And behind them, an entire community had become witnesses. Determination surged through him. He was no longer just a garbage man doing his route. He was the barrier between a racist judge and two lives that needed saving. And he would not move. The moment felt suspended, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The officers had spread out, some edging closer to Richard's car, others lingering near Derrick. The neighbors hadn't put their phones down. If anything, more had joined, cameras glowing like 1,000 unblinking eyes. Richard Hayes, realizing his grip on the narrative was slipping, snapped. His calm, polished persona evaporated. He yanked Martha out of the car once more, jerking her by the wrist so hard she cried out. "Look at her!" Richard barked, his voice booming across the driveway. "She's hysterical. She's making up lies. And this man," he jabbed toward Derrick, "this black garbage man is feeding into it because he wants to play the hero." The officers froze. Some looked uneasy, others looked conflicted. But no one moved. Grace screamed, "It's not lies! He hurts her! He hurts us!" The child's raw voice cut sharper than any blade. The crowd murmured louder. A woman across the street shouted, "We all heard the glass break. We saw her bruises." Another neighbor added, "We're recording this, Judge. Everyone will see." Richard's face twisted with rage. He dragged Martha closer to him, like a shield, and glared at Derrick. "You think you can humiliate me? You're nothing. I'll drag you down into the dirt where you belong." Derrick stepped forward, his pulse hammering. His voice carried not just to Richard, but to every officer, every neighbor. "You already dragged yourself there, Richard. Today, the whole community sees who you really are." For a split second, Richard faltered. Then his rage boiled over. He shoved Martha aside, storming toward Derrick with clenched fists. The crowd gasped. Grace shrieked. Derrick braced himself. Every muscle tensed. He had promised himself not to fight back physically, because he knew how it would look. A black man brawling with a judge in front of cops and cameras? The story would be twisted in an instant. But when Richard lunged, shoving him hard in the chest, Derrick held his ground. "Don't touch me again," Derrick warned, his voice low but firm. Richard shoved harder. "Or what? You'll call the cops? They're already here, and they'll believe me." But Derrick didn't budge. The neighbors roared now, shouting at the officers, "Do something!" He's assaulting them in front of everyone. Finally, one officer stepped in, grabbing Richard's arm. Richard whipped around, livid. Take your hands off me. I am a judge. I'll end your career for this. But the other officers had seen enough. One moved to Martha, gently guiding her to safety. Another crouched to comfort Grace. And still others closed in around Richard. He thrashed, shouting every insult he could muster. This is a setup! This is a conspiracy! You'll all regret this! The neighbors' voices drowned him out. Phones stayed up, recording every second. Derrick didn't move. He stood tall, steady, a barrier between Richard and the family he had terrorized. And as Richard struggled against the officers, spitting fury, Derrick said the words that sealed the moment. No more hiding, no more silence. Everyone sees you now. The street erupted with shouts, the sound of Richard being restrained echoing like the first crack of justice breaking through years of abuse. For Derrick, it wasn't victory yet. But it was the first real strike against a man who thought he could never fall. The night air buzzed with chaos, shouts, sirens, the rustle of restless neighbors. Richard Hayes was pinned between two officers, his face red, veins bulging as he fought against the restraint. His robe of authority had slipped off. Now he looked less like a judge, and more like a desperate man exposed under a spotlight. Derrick Cole stood unmoving, shoulders squared. Grace clung to him. Martha leaned weakly on the hood of a patrol car, and for the first time in years, Derrick felt the tide shifting. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Richard twisted, his voice breaking through the noise. You fools! You think you can end me like this? I am the law here. I'll bury every one of you. But before the officers could drag him fully away, he turned his venom on Derrick. And you, Cole, you'll rot. You think tonight makes you a hero? Tomorrow you'll be nothing but a broken black man who crossed the wrong judge. The crowd bristled. A neighbor shouted back, We've got it all on video! Another yelled, You're finished, Hayes! Derrick didn't need to raise his voice. He simply locked eyes with Richard and said, calm and steady, No, Richard, you buried yourself. This time, the world saw it happen. The words struck harder than fists. Richard's fury sputtered into silence, swallowed by the sea of phones capturing his downfall. Two officers finally forced him into the back of a squad car. The door slammed shut with a metallic thud that echoed like a verdict. For a man who had spent his life sentencing others, the sound was poetic. Grace buried her face in Derrick's chest, sobbing. Martha, trembling, whispered through cracked lips, Thank you. Thank you for not letting him take her. Derrick held them both, feeling the weight of years of rejection peel away. He wasn't just the man who picked up garbage. Tonight, he had done what the Academy had once told him he could never do. Stand as a shield, a protector. But even as relief washed over him, Derrick knew this was only the beginning. Richard wasn't just another abuser. He was a judge, a man with allies, strings to pull, secrets to exploit. The battle wasn't finished in a driveway under flashing lights. It had only been exposed. One of the neighbors called out, Cole, we're with you! Don't let them bury this! Others joined in, their voices turning the street into a chorus of defiance. Derrick nodded, lifting his head. I won't. Not this time. The camera flashes caught his face as he spoke. Not as a man defeated, but as someone finally stepping into the role he was meant to play. As Richard's squad car pulled away, swallowed by the sirens, Derrick felt Grace's hand slip into his. It was small, trembling, but filled with trust. The night ended not with peace, but with a promise. That no matter how powerful the system seemed, truth could still break through when someone chose to stand tall. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, one question lingered in the air. One that no phone could answer, no recording could predict. Would this be the end of Richard Hayes, or the beginning of an even darker war? This story is a reminder that compassion and courage matter most when silence feels easier. If you were in Derrick's place, standing between power and a child begging for help, what would you do? Your voice matters. It might be the spark someone else needs to find their own courage,